He gave up his only taxi to a woman, drenched in rain, clutching a newborn with fear in her eyes. He never asked her name. He never knew her past, but what he did in that one moment would lead to a rescue, a reunion, and a truth that would change all their lives forever. And when fire came, he had only seconds to face everything he had been running from. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video. And tell us, where are you watching from now? Let's jump into the story. The city breathed in noise and movement as the late afternoon sky grew darker with heavy clouds. New York was always rushing somewhere, honking cars, flashing lights, and voices blending into a hum of urgency. But today, something felt slower, like the sky itself was holding back tears. Jonas Reed stood on the corner of West 64th Street and Riverside Boulevard. He wore a navy jacket that had lost its shine and shoes that knew too many miles. His brown eyes scanned the road with a quiet patience, the kind that comes from living with things too big to name. He had just left his weekly visit to the city wellness clinic. It was routine by now, questions about his sleeping habits, his chest pains, his memories. He never liked talking about the past. But he showed up anyway, 36 years old, with the posture of a man who had seen more than he spoke. A booth drizzle started, soft, almost shy. Jonas pulled his hood up and raised one arm to wave down a yellow cab that slowed near the curb. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the door. Just then a voice cut through the wet air. "Wait, please." Jonas turned. A woman was running toward him, her face pale under wet strands of hair. She held something tight against her chest, wrapped in a floral blanket. Her steps were uneven, like she had been running for mile-ish. Looked at her. She looked only at the cab. She was soaked from head to toe, her jeans clinging to her legs, her sweater dark with rain. Her arms tightened around the bundle, and Jonas saw then it was a baby, just a few weeks old. Maybe the child's tiny hand peeked out, curled and shaking from the cold. Cab driver tapped the horn once, impatient. Jonas hesitated. Then without a word he pulled the door wider and took a step back. "You take it," he said, his voice calm, steady. "You look like you need it more than meth." Woman blinked, raindrops clinging to her lashes. She looked at him for the first time, and her lips parted with a breath that sounded like relief. "Thank you," she whispered, barely louder than the rain. "I just need to go." Nosh climbed in, holding the baby like something sacred. The cab pulled off seconds later, taillights glowing red against the wet pavement. Jonas watched until the car disappeared into the blur of traffic. He didn't know her name, he didn't know where she was going, but something about her stayed with him. He stood there a moment longer, his shoulders wet, his hands cold. Sound of the city returned slowly around him, voices, cars, footsteps. But Jonas felt like he had stepped into another time, a time when decisions felt like turning points, even if they lasted just seconds. Turned and began to walk toward his mother's apartment just a few blocks away. But the image of the woman and her baby sat in his chest like a small stone. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way she held her child so fiercely. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes, or maybe it was because for a brief moment, two strangers had met, and something wordless had passed between them. Not pity, not charity, something else. A choice to help, no questions asked. Meanwhile, across the city, the woman sat in the cab, arms wrapped around her daughter, the baby's breath soft against her collarbone, her own breath still shaky. She didn't know who he was. She hadn't seen his face clearly, but in that rainy corner of the city, he had made space for her without hesitation, without needing anything in return. As the cab moved through traffic, she turned and looked back through the fogged window. She saw him still standing there, still watching, hadn't moved, and something about that stillness, that presence, felt like safety. Neither of them knew it then, but that rainy moment, fleeting, quiet, and soaked with uncertainty, was the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could imagine. And as the cab rolled away and Jonas turned down a quieter street, the rain finally fell harder, but neither of them felt the cold. Beckow, sometimes a single act of kindness, a decision made in the blink of an eye, is enough to change a life, and this one had just begun. The sky was a soft gray blanket over the city, the kind that made everything quieter. Inside a small coffee shop near Hudson Medical Center, the scent of roasted beans filled the air. Steam rose from cups, and the low hum of voices blended with the sound of milk being frothed behind the counter. Jonas Reed stepped inside, pushing the glass door open. With one hand he held it for an older man behind him, then shook the rain off his jacket. His morning had started with a visit to the hospital, where his mother was doing her physical therapy. He had time to spare, so he came here like he often did, not for the coffee, really just for the quietness. Eyes searched for an empty seat near the window, and then he saw her. The woman from the range was in a corner booth, a gray hood pulled over her head. She gently rocked a baby in her arms, her eyes tired but soft as she looked down at the child. The baby let out a soft sound, and she whispered something to calm her. Jonas froze for a moment, unsure if he should say something. Then the barista called out almond latte for Mira, her name. Mira stood to get her drink, and that's when their eyes met. She paused a little longer than needed, her lips parting slightly in surprise, then something like relief passed over her face. She said quietly, almost like a question. Jonas gave a small nod. Looks like you found that cab after all, he said with a smile. Thanks to you, she answered, her voice still gentle. Neither of them moved right away. Then Jonas took a few steps and slid into the seat across from her. Myra adjusted the baby in her arms, the little one now blinking up at Jonas with curious eyes. Never got to thank you, Mira said. You just did, he replied. They sat like that for a while, the sound of the coffee shop wrapping around them like a soft blanket outside. The rain tapped against the window, steady and calmy. Feel like I should explain, she said finally. You don't have to, Jonas said, but his voice was open, not dismissive. They want to, Mira replied, then looked down at her daughter. Her name is Lenny. I'm Mira Weston. I used to run a tech company called Weston Loop. Jonas raised his eyebrows a little but said nothing. She disappeared a few months ago, she continued. My pregnancy became public. I wasn't married. There was no father listed. Suddenly, I was a scandal. The board called it a distraction. They asked me to step away, so I did. Looked out the window, watching the rain slide down the glassy. Went into hiding, rented a place on the edge of the city. Had the baby alone the night you gave me the cab. I was trying to get out before the press found mesh stopped her, hand gently brushing the top of Lenny's head. Don't even know why I'm telling you all this, she said with a quiet laugh. Maybe because I'm not trying to fix anything, Jonas said, just listening. She looked at him again, more closely this time. His face was calm and steady, no pity, just presence. And you, Mira asked, what's your story? Jonas shrugged. Used to be a firefighter, not anymore. She waited for him to say more. He didn't, and she didn't press. Outside, thunder rolled softly, and the rain picked up again. Jonas stood slowly. He walked to the door and pulled an umbrella from the stand, then came back to Mira. Come on, he said, with that same gentle voice from the day they met. She followed him out of the coffee shop, opened the umbrella, not over himself, but over her and Lenny. His own jacket quickly soaked as he adjusted his arm to keep the wind off. The Mira noticed how he angled his body, how he made himself a shield without a word. Her breath caught slightly. They walked in silence down the sidewalk, water puddling around their feet. The baby was quiet, now eyes closed against her mother's chest. Thank you, Myra said, not just for the umbrella. Jonas gave a small smile. Anytime something about the way he said it made her heart ache a little, not because it was romantic, but because it was real. When they reached the corner, Mira stopped. This is us, she said, nodding toward a quiet building. Jonas handed her the umbrella. Keep it, he said. She hesitated, then took it. As she stepped toward the door, she turned once more. See you again, she asked. Jonas nodded. If you want. Tosh gave a small smile. Dove door clicked shut behind her, and Jonas stood there in the rain, watching it for a moment longer. Something inside him had shifted, not suddenly, not loudly, just a quiet click, like a door opening somewhere deep inside. He turned and walked away. The umbrella gone, but something else left in its place. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something new. The night was still, and the air was cooler than usual for early summer. A light breeze moved through the trees outside the quiet rental house where Mira and baby Lenny slept upstairs. The house was old, but it had been enough a place away from noise, from questions, from everything she had left behind. Inside the bedroom, Mira lay on her side, curled around Lenny. The baby's soft breathing was steady. Mira's hand rested gently on her daughter's back, feeling each rise and fall sound. Started quietly a faint crack from somewhere beneath the floorboards. The baby stirred, but did not wake. Then came another sound, the low growl of fire just beginning to wake in. The kitchen below, an old wire sparked behind the wall. It caught the curtain. Then the wood smoke moved fast and quiet, at first like a shadow with purpose. Mira coughed once, then sat up. The air already felt thick. Her eyes blinked open slowly, but her body moved fast. She grabbed Lenny, held her close, and rushed to the door, but the hallway was already gray with smoke. Orange light flickered beyond the stairs. No, Mira whispered, clutching Lenny tighter. She shut the door and ran to the window. It stuck. She pulled hard, her hands shaking, sweat mixing with fear. It would not budge. Help, someone please, my baby, she screamed into the night. Outside, a few neighbors had gathered. Some called for help, others watched. Down the street, a car turned the corner and stopped suddenly. Janashi had been driving home after a late shift at the driving school. When he saw the smoke, something inside him froze. His breath caught, his chest tightened. Memories rushed in. Another house, another fire, a teammate trapped inside, a voice screaming for help, the sound of the ceiling giving way. His legs did not move. He stood staring at the burning porch, the front door already lost in flames. Then he heard Mira's voice, faint but desperate, from the upstairs window. Saw her face lit by firelight, her eyes wide with fear. She was holding Lenny and pounding on the glass. And something broke inside. Jonash could not let it happen again, not this time. Grabbed a garden hose from the yard, soaked a wool blanket, and wrapped it around himself. Then without hesitation he ran toward the side entrance and kicked the door open. Heat hit him like a wall. Smoke burned his eyes, but he moved each step. Loud in his ears would groan beneath him. The stairs creaked but held Mira. He shouted. A voice answered, faint and broken. Upstairs found the bedroom door. It opened with a slam. Mira crouched on the floor, holding Lenny, her face lit up when she saw him. Janasrap, her in your coat now, he said, his voice rough but steady. Mira did not ask questions. She pulled her coat tight around the baby and handed her to Jonas. He lifted the baby, then reached for Marave. Got you, he said. She grabbed his arm. They moved fast. Each step down the stairs felt like a test. The wood shifted, the smoke thickened. When they reached the bottom, the floor gave a little. Jonas didn't stop. He pushed forward and crashed through the door just as the ceiling behind them fell. Outside, neighbors gasped. Sirens howled in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed against the smoky. Jonas stumbled onto the grass and lowered Mira and Lenny down. He dropped to one knee, his breath heavy, his face blackened. Freeforts rushed over. One tried to place a mask on him, but he shook it off. His eyes were only on Mira and the baby. Mira coughed and tried to speak, but no words came. She looked at him, and her eyes filled with tears. She'd saved them again. In the hospital later, machines beeped softly in the background. Fluorescent lights buzzed above. Mira opened her eyes slowly. Her arms ached, but her first thought was for Lenny. Baby lay nearby in a small crib, safe and sleeping. Mira let out a breath, then turned her head and saw through the hallway. Jonas sat alone on a bench, his hand wrapped in gauze. His shoulders hunched. Looked tired, more than tired. Looked like he was somewhere else. Mira stood up slowly, ignoring the nurse's quiet protest. She walked barefoot across the cold floor and stood in front of him. Jonas looked up. Hi, you saved us again, she said softly. Nodded, but said nothing. His eyes dropped to the floor. You weren't supposed to be there, he whispered. But maybe I was. Myra sat next to him. The silence between them was full, but not heavy. After a moment, the sound of baby fussing came from down the hall. Mira moved to stand, but Jonas gently touched her arm. Eve got her, he said quietly. Stood and walked to the crib, lifted Lenny in his arms. He whispered, gently rocking her. You're okay? No. His voice was low, soft, meant only for her. Mira watched from the doorway, her eyes wet, her heart full, because in that moment she saw something more. Not just a man who ran into fire, but a man who stayed. The days that followed were quiet in a new kind of way, the kind of quiet that feels safe. Mira rested more now, though her thoughts still moved fast at night. But when she looked over and saw Lenny asleep or heard Jonas humming gently in the kitchen, she felt a little more at peace. Jonas came by often, sometimes with groceries, sometimes Just with coffee and that calm, steady way of his, he never asked for anything, never expected a thank you. He simply showed up. These shared dinners at the small table in her apartment, sometimes with music in the background, sometimes just their voices, and some nights no sound at all, except the soft laughter of a baby. Mira smiled more these days, so did Jonas, but sometimes he would go quiet and stare out the window like he was listening for something that only he could hear all night as the sun dipped low and the apartment filled with warm gold light. Jonas sat on the couch fiddling with the edge of a cushion. Mira noticed the shift in his shoulders, the faraway look in his eyes. "You okay?" she asked softly, hesitated, then spoke. "There was a fire years ago. I was still a firefighter. It was a warehouse. We thought it was empty, but it wasn't." The paused, his hands still now resting in his lap. "Whoa, guys. Didn't make it out. I tried. I really did, but it wasn't enough." Looked down, his voice low after that. "I stopped. I couldn't sleep, couldn't walk into a building without hearing things that weren't there. So I quit, told myself I was done saving." And you, Mira reached over and placed her hand gently over his eye. "You didn't fail them," she said. "You came back for us. And that means more than you now." Jonas didn't say anything, but his shoulders dropped just a little, like the weight had shifted. That night they sat close, not speaking much, just sharing the same space. Mira leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let out a slow breath that sounded like release. Next morning, Mira stood at her window watching the building across the street. Jonas lived there. She had seen it once, small, clean, but worn and crumbling. Had the means to help, not in a loud way, but in the kind of way that made things better, quietly so. She made one call, then another, and within a week the building had a new owner. The tenants would stay. No rent hikes, no flashy changes, just dignity. She left no trace of herself in the deal. She wanted it to stay quiet, especially from Jonas. But one evening he came home to find an envelope under his door, his name written in neat handwriting. Opened it slowly. Inside was a single note: "One who walks through fire for a stranger should ever worry about rent." Jonas stood in the hallway for a long time, reading the note again and again, his chest tight, but in a good way. He didn't need a signature. He knew. The next morning he brought coffee and muffins as usual, but when Myra opened the door and saw his eyes, she knew. He knew. Said nothing about it, neither did she, but that silence, like many between them, was full of meaning. Weeks later, the city buzzed with lights and laughter at the Everson Foundation Gala, an event now dedicated to mothers and children. Starting over, Myra stood near the stage in a deep blue gown, her hair soft around her face. She looked composed, but her eyes kept drifting across the room. Jonas stood near the back in a simple suit, Lenny in his arms. The baby held his tie in one tiny fist while he whispered something that made her jiggle. Myra stepped up to the podium. The room went quiet. "There is someone I want to thank," she said, "not just for tonight, not just for saving my life, but for reminding me what it means to be truly selfish." Looked straight at Jonas. A ripple moved through the crowd. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments. A ride, a rescue, a kind word, a second chance. Shesh reached under the podium and held out a small velvet box. "Jonas, will you come up?" Hurry moved slowly through the room, still holding Lenny, his steps sure but humble. He opened the box. Inside was a silver key and a photo, the three of them on the couch, smiling, and a handwritten note from Mira: "You gave me a ride to safety. Now let me drive you home." Jonas looked at the photo, then at the key, then at Miranly. "If you'll be there every night," he said always. She whispered. The room clapped, but to them the world had narrowed down to the three of them, a man, a woman, and a baby, who had brought their hearts together. As they left the stage, flashes lit up from every direction. Reporters shouted questions. "Mira, do you plan to return as CEO?" "Jonas, are you in a relationship? What brought you two together?" Jonas didn't flinch. He simply placed an arm around Mira's shoulders, held Lenny close, and said, "She's more than a headline. She's a mother, and she deserves peace." Ethy turned away from the cameras, their steps calm, their hearts full, because in that moment they weren't escaping anything. They were going home.